Plex Track is the premier pen test reporting and collaboration platform, empowering your team to spend more time hacking and less time reporting. Plex Track centralizes your data, streamlines tedious workflows, automates report building, and facilitates communication with stakeholders. To learn how you can achieve a 30% increase in efficiency and cut report cycles by up to 65%, head to securityweekly.com/Plex Track. Claim your free month of Plex Track and get your copy of the Writing a Killer Penetration Test Report Guide today. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. You can find us now on Instagram. Follow us for highlight reels, giveaway announcements, Larry's cross-dressing gardening videos, selfies of Tyler with his shirt off, the Mandy Pirate video series, Josh's cooking videos where he prepares all meals using only pickled okra, and Sam Bound's tips on collecting hairballs for fun and profit. All that and more at Sec Weekly on Instagram.
Wow, see, and I thought you were making that up, but no, it was on the teleprompter.
I wrote it on the teleprompter, yes.
Wow. Wow.
Had to spice it up a little, you know?
Yeah, spicy.
It's spicy, all right. Where do we want to start? You want to pick? We'll pick random. We'll pick Flipper. We'll start with one.
Sure. And I know Sam's got an AI story when he comes in there, and I have one that we put in last week that I just thought was too funny not to put back in again this week, but it's AI related. So the Flipper Zero is really, really like the nerdiest hacking device toy out there. It's a lot of fun, and so I'm late to the party. And I started to delve into it a little bit. Been dabbling here and there. Like mostly, you can play pranks on people, which is really dangerous for all of us hackers that have these devices. It's really dangerous. It's really a bad thing. And so I've been playing with. Did you do the Unleashed firmware? I have not done the Unleashed firmware yet. I haven't needed to.
I did Unleashed on mine. And it unlocks some things, which is nice. And then I just started down like the rabbit hole, and I've been working with the infrared on it, and I found a massive database of infrared files. Now I'm learning you got to be careful what you're pulling down from GitHub and putting on there. Also, how you're putting it on there. Like, don't use the QFlipper app to transfer like large amounts of data to it. You just want to mount your SD card. Fortunately, I read the documentation, didn't make that mistake. Also, some of the stuff in these open repositories that's user generated, you can actually like burn out your Flipper on there because it can go outside of the recommended frequency ranges. Also, one of the infrared apps increased the power of the IR, and I wasn't sure if that was safe or not. I do want that, but I'm not sure that I don't want to melt anything on my Flipper. I do link to the infrared database that I've been messing with. So if you go into your saved, there's like pages and pages of all kinds of different things, like really weird stuff. So you get like projectors and AV equipment, and I've been testing it.
Air conditioners, yeah. All kinds of stuff. So I've been testing it here and there, and it's been working pretty good. And I want to get in there and start like developing stuff. Like I want to do like macros, essentially, so I can send multiple. I think I can do that right in the IR file itself. Well, yeah, the IR files are all text.
Yeah.
So you just need to know which text commands you need to do, and then just
put them all in one button press. You basically
Yep.
can put multiple IR commands in one button press, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
And you can program in whatever language you want, Paul. So Python definitely has a library.
Definitely. So I'm starting to get down that rabbit hole. I thought I'd start with, the easier pre-made stuff that's in there. Have you used it to unlock cars and stuff?
No, I have not.
So if you look hard enough online, you can find whole databases of basically the sub-gigahertz, right? And I found ones that says you can lock and unlock Honda.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't done it successfully, but that's definitely, I think we covered stories on that.
Yep, on Original Rice Patty, and then there was another
Yep.
one that came after that as well.
It's kind of,
it's included with some of the extended firmware module packs.
Right.
If you if you do those, some of those have the additional modules already included.
Garage
You
door
do have to be
openers
careful
too.
with some of those.
Yes, garage door openers are on there. I didn't see my model, but there's I was watching videos and how you can capture those signals and replay them and stuff like that. Obviously on the Flipper, which
obviously a little bit harder with the rolling code stuff.
Yep. Okay.
But that said, there are still plenty of garage door openers out there that do not implement rolling codes, because if it's not broken, why do you need to replace the garage door opener?
Right.
Yep. Yeah, if you can capture the modulation and the different frequency things, especially if you have a key, like you can do some interesting stuff. There's a bunch of sub gigahertz stuff that you can play around with. There's a lot of nuance to that, though, as Larry and many of his class articles kind of go through. So it's not quite as easy as, put a module on and unlock a random Honda in the parking lot. Not quite how it works.
Yeah, it's not going to work all the time. Like, as I sit next to Larry,
too far off.
Yeah, like I've covered not all, but a lot of the research tools and hardware, like over the years and stuff like that, and dabbled. But so there's definitely doesn't work on everything. I can see this in the wrong hands being really bad. But then again, they're not going to know how to make it work for certain things or understand why it's not working.
Right. And in some cases, you may be limited to what the actual hardware can do, power-wise, to be able to do that in real time and those types of things.
And I cloned one of my RFID badges too, and it worked really well. That was super easy. I was like, wow, that's but having all of that functionality in one device has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there's been this technology tools, even projects that, you carry around a big backpack full of different tools, but if you can replace, your bus pirate, your Great FET, you can replace your RFID hacker cloner device of your choosing, all of those in one device. If you're just doing research and testing, it saves a ton of money and or things that can go wrong from a programming and or hardware standpoint. That being said, each of those tools has its place for usability and additional functionality and customization that is very specific to that technology. So there's a place for both still, and I think that's been the great thing, is it gets a lot more people involved in the hardware side of some of this, while still letting them explore the other tools once they get used to it and see how it all works.
Yeah, and I also like it, kind of to your point, Tyler, that in Larry, it's something you can just take with you. I can just throw it in my pocket, and I've got all of that stuff with me, and if I want to mess around with something, I can at least...
If you're sitting at a basic performance or a unentertaining soccer game and you just need something to do, or listening to your wife's friends ramble, you've got something in your pocket to play with.
I try...
I mean, you don't even need the... Never.
I try to be careful with that because I'm still learning what all of the things do on it and what all of the add-ons and stuff do. And so I like more controlled environments. I walked in the cigar lounge and someone was asking me about it. So I started turning on and off TVs, and then I couldn't turn them back on and stuff like that. I was like, wait, no, that's a different file. Hold on. I messed up. So I try not to do it in a live soccer game, Tyler, and start turning stuff off because am I going to be able to turn that back on? Oops. So yeah.
What do you mean you can't turn it back on? I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Turn what off?
Yeah, they didn't put the soccer game on. I'm not watching Orange Housewives of California, whatever it is. So, win-win.
There's a lot of TVs in the Flipper IRDB that I link to. Tons of TVs. So use with caution. Don't pull too many shenanigans. Light shenanigans with permission if you can.
Light
50 Shades of Grey. Yeah. Light shenanigans.
Light shenanigans. That's what I'm... Yes. Let's see. There's a security advisory for remote command execution in binwalk. This one is probably the most straightforward to understand the details behind it. We're not talking about kernel system calls and memory corruption inside of the kernel or things like that. This is basically the difference between a path and an absolute path.
Yeah.
That's really what it boils down to. I put some examples in there in Python because I wanted to actually see it in action. I was like, oh, I can just write one line of Python on the command line and really just exemplify exactly what this vulnerability is, right? So in absolute path, if you put a path before your ... it's going to take everything after that, right? So if you're trying to directory traverse to get Etsy password, it's just going to put the absolute path to Etsy password, and it's not going to work. And that's the difference between ospath.join or os and ospath.abs path. Yes.
Absolute path.
Absolute path.
Right.
Yep. ABS path is the method call in Python. That's all explained in the post, and it has to do with parsing the PFS file system that's included in firmware, certain firmwares. They say it's very esoteric. When I talk to people that do a lot of firmware stuff for a living, they say it's more common than you think.
It's definitely esoteric, but it's more common than you think.
Yes.
It's both, honestly.
Say Paul and Larry that, maybe have seen systems that can analyze hundreds of thousands of different types of firmware. You tend to run across it a little more often.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
It's a little more common than you think. But
like if you're doing like a analysis of a firmware for like a pretty standard IoT device, it's probably not going to be using this file system. Right. At least when I did a lot of that analysis, like I didn't see a lot of PFS like ever, right? But you get into some more of the weird firmwares and other different firmwares. Apparently, they use more often,
industry-specific devices.
Yeah. So the vulnerability was in Binwalk when it parses that file system has the path traversal issue that leads to remote command execution.
There's a part that I find that's terrifying about this is that the open source community and so many folks that are learning IoT, firmware reverse engineering, firmware analysis. Binwalk is the shit. Binwalk is the tool that folks use. And this bug had a pull request filed in October. And it has remained radio silent since October.
There's a chronicling of trying to get in touch with the right people because Binwalk was controlled by first Tactical Network Solutions, then they changed their name to Refirm Labs. Then they got bought up by Microsoft. If you search back in our history, Craig Hefner and Terry, what was his name? It's Terry. I pulled this interview from one of my coworkers when we were talking about this or something else. I'm like, wait, I know Terry. I interviewed him once. I think you and I both interviewed him together, Larry.
We did. Almost positive.
Now I feel bad, and I can't remember his name. I went back and I listened to some of it. I was like, it was still a damn good interview. And now...
Dunlap.
Yes, Terry Dunlap. Thank you. Yeah. So, but did they fix this? Or
nope. The pull request has not been accepted.
Gotcha.
And part of the reason why they went, quote, public with it is that the pull request was public and they felt it had been long enough. And in the other two, the other one,
they give you the fix in here. They tell you what code to change.
It's simple. Yeah, it's a one-line change. It's a one-line change.
I thought that pull request was committed, though.
It wasn't. To the best of my knowledge, it was not.
It was. It was committed.
It?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. When I looked at it, they did actually commit it.
I thought when I looked yesterday that it was not, but that's my bad. Okay. In any case, it had been out there for quite some time. There was not a lot of movement, and it's disappointing that we're seeing an amazing open source tool stagnate because they got purchased by Microsoft, and they're taking all of that and pulling it into Microsoft's platform. And
well, I want to ask a question about the threat modeling here, though, because in order to attack it, you have to download malicious firmware and extract it, right? And if you're downloading and extracting unknown firmware, you should be treating that as malware, doing that in a virtual machine, assuming a bad thing might happen, shouldn't you?
I would say so.
So, I mean, that might be why they don't take it too seriously, because they just don't see this as a reasonable threat model.
Yeah, but also a malicious actor has to modify the firmware to contain this exploit, and then you have to obtain said firmware and then analyze it. So I'm not saying it's not possible, obviously, right? But there's a series of events that has to take place. Either like someone has to be in the supply chain for that firmware, however they get
or they start publishing some samples of, hey, here's a bunch of samples of firmware to analyze for practice, and then they start and then it becomes a targeted attack against about a bunch of folks that do firmware.
But then I think you've got this. Then I think you got the same situation as every pen tester. When you find a POC on GitHub, you can't just run it. You have to look at it. When you're getting random code, you can't trust it.
Yep.
Very true.
Very true. Very true. I didn't look into enough to what the PFS file format and where this would be a problem to see if you could actually have this exploit in actual working firmware. So that a company that actually uses PFS that doesn't want their code to get their firmware to be analyzed include it so that if anybody opens it with binwalk, it could erase binwalk.
Mm.
Well, that's been around forever. Anti-forensic tools.
Yeah.
You can, I think you can do it, but I don't think it's considered a professional move.
True.
How about some meta?
Yeah, that's where I was going next.
Meta?
Bug allowed anyone to bypass.
Before we jump into another story, how'd your talk go at ShmooCon, Paul?
Really well. I thought it was very well received.
And what'd you talk about?
Permanently bricking your computer using UEFI, basically misconfiguration and vulnerabilities.
ShmooCon only makes their talks available to attendees, right? They're not out there in the public.
On YouTube.
Yeah,
Are they up on YouTube now?
The Twitch stream was saved to YouTube, so it's not just my talk. You can kind of scrub to the point in the Belay It track on Sunday. If you Google around for it, it's there.
The audio's a little rough.
The audio's rough.
We need to help clean some of that up for them, but other than that, it was a great talk.
Thank you. It went good though.
Cool.
More to follow. There's more research. We did research and continuing research in that area, so I hope to have more on that.
Excellent. Sorry, I just.
That's great. Thank you.
That's a good one.
I knew you were going, and I wanted to have the chance to ask.
It was fun. Oh, and someone put a bottle of Weller on the table and poured me a glass right as I started my talk, which really I think helped make it better. So there was that. A hacker finds a bug that allowed anyone to bypass Facebook's two-factor authentication. So
they did not pay this guy enough. I don't care what anybody says. This is some BS. $27,000 my ass. This is a cool hack.
You thought it is a cool hack. So with a victim's, I'm going to read from with a victim's phone number, an attacker goes to the centralized account center. So this is for Facebook and Instagram. Enter the phone number of the victim. Link that number to their own Facebook account, the attacker's Facebook account, then brute force the two-factor SMS code. That was the key step. There was no upper limit to the amount of attempts.
Oh, geez.
But wouldn't the victim get an SMS message with the code while the attacker's brute forcing it? The victim does get one message, I would imagine.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, they would get a message. But that doesn't mean that the session time's out for the brute force as it's going. And once the brute force is successful, what happens on this particular case is it associates that phone number with the attacker's Facebook account that he's pushing that to. It removes and disables the two-factor on the victim's Facebook account. So therefore, if you know the password or you're trying to brute force that password, you can now do that without 2FA being enabled. So that's kind of the impact that you chain those together. That's a bad day for someone losing a lot of Facebook accounts.
Sam's gone incognito.
I get the emails all the time. You've just logged into whatever from a different device. Is this really you? If it is, ignore it. I've never seen an email saying, you were just prompted for 2FA or MFA from a different device. Is this really you? Is there something that can be done there? Or
if I remember right,
is the assumption that if you get an SMS code and you haven't been trying to log in, are they assuming you're going to do something about that?
I would assume so. Like, you should assume your account's password's taken over. I guess the regular user's not going to assume that. And the only other indication you get is obviously you get the SMS, but then you would get an account change.
Email. It's too late
in your primary email for the Facebook account that lost the two-factor.
Right. Well, it's not too late at that point. That just means they've managed to disable. It just
means you better go turn it back on.
Yeah, you got to turn it back on. Yeah, like if I got the text message, I'd be like, okay, someone's trying to get into my account, but they don't have the two-factor, so I'm not at immediate risk right now. But then if I got the email that two-factor was disabled, I'd panic.
This is probably a bigger deal for those larger, high-profile, like verified accounts on Instagram or Facebook, where they're very targeted. The phone number is known. There's been breach data. Maybe there's a recent breach where the password is now known, but there's two-factor on those accounts. Those are the ones that are going to be targeted very quickly. That they get through that brute force. That's really the only step that's hindering them. Once the SMS two-factor's off, they already have the password. They get in. They reset it. They add two-factor of their own. and it's a bad day.
Yep.
And then they go to the marketplace and they sell the Instagram account, right? That's a thing where if you've got a short Instagram handle or an English dictionary word, for example, like a name of an animal, people, they'll swat you. They'll do. There was a Darknet Diaries
it's so hard
episode
to
on
get
that.
back.
It was. There's some. Instagram is the Mos Eisley of social media networks in that respect. And I don't want to knock the Instagram security team because I wouldn't want to be on the Instagram security team. I give you folks a lot of credit because there's a lot of people just trying to pull shenanigans, and I don't think it's because Instagram security is weak. I think that there's an opportunity to monetize some of that. Therefore, attackers are going after it. And man, you folks have your work cut out for you. Good Lord.
But think about, clearly there's some success here, and think about how successful this could be without that upper limit of failed two-factor authentication attempts. Because all you really need to do is exploit human behavior. Because is your phone plugged in next to the bed when you go to bed at night?
Yep.
Do you respond to every text message that you get at 3 a.m.?
No, because at least on Android, you can auto set do not disturb during certain hours.
So you don't wake
up everyone in the house.
You know which time to do this.
Exactly.
Yep.
That's my point. Like we know what time that
many
people will not respond to that. Hey, you just got a two-factor authentication code for Facebook or Instagram. And then an hour later, you get an email that your two-factor authentication was disabled.
You're touching on, Larry, the sort of the philosophical aspect that I'm curious about and want to know what everybody thinks, because, PCI forever has said, limited login attempts. But I think as far as the two-factor, I'm not aware of any solution that limits two-factor attempts at typing in the factor, but they generally expire after a minute or 3 minutes or something like that. Do they need to have limits? Is the time
most good ones have OAuth and a lot of the SaaS applications only have a 3-try limit, I believe, on those. Otherwise, it expires. Or there's the time
by default, or do they
is,
just have the time expiration?
No, that's per app. They're defining that per.
I think it's per app.
Yeah. Per app.
But you also have a very limited time there too, because your token expiration is within 30 seconds. So that's going to be something that you're going to use something like Proxy Cannon or a large number of requests very quickly to get that two-factor, and hopefully it saves that session token once you get that successful.
Right.
So
I remember years ago. Who remembers using an RSA key? And the random digits were changing every 3 minutes or something, but they would allow some sort of delay, maybe 30 seconds or a minute of the previous code. So they were remembering the previous code. So even though it expired in 2 or 3 minutes, you could try it for maybe 4 or 5 minutes, and
still the case.
I might have known some exploitation there.
Still the case with many two-factor stuff, because I know I use a bunch of two-factor apps, and I'll fire up the app and I go to log in, and the token that I'm currently trying to type in has 3 seconds left, and it takes me 6 seconds to type it in,
and it doesn't work.
No, it does.
Oh, in mine, Google Authenticator, sometimes it just won't work.
It's because it's Google Authenticator.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I've never figured a second factor and had to try it multiple times, so I'm not aware that some of them might limit the attempts. So I take your word for it, Tyler. But I guess I was making the assumption that they just time out after a couple of minutes.
Yeah, not all apps do that. Let's be very clear. But we'll say a lot of the big platforms do. Especially anything that leverages the single sign-on, SAML with Federation, those almost all have a incorrect number.
Gotcha.
Tyler, I know you're a big VMware person. vRealize log insight exploit.
Yeah.
Did you see this one?
Oh yeah.
This one's interesting.
Messing with it all week.
I like the team at Horizon 3 AI. Because they were at ShmooCon. I didn't get a chance to talk to the team that was there at their table at ShmooCon. And I don't even like. What do they? I don't remember what product they have. Is it like a automated pen testing?
It's an automated pen test and attack surface
monitoring. Yeah.
Monitoring and assessment tool.
But their research team does amazing write-ups. I love reading their write-ups. When they find vulnerabilities and write exploits, they write everything up in great detail, and it's a great learning experience for everyone. Like this stuff's awesome. It's the kind of stories I like to cover here on the show. So this one is chaining some exploits together. An unauthenticated RPC endpoint was exposed on the application that they then coupled with a directory traversal attack to gain remote code execution. So they summarize this. So thrift
it's a remote download command, which is, I guess you can make that do remote code execution if you pack it right.
Right.
So, yes.
So you're telling the server to download something from the client, and it downloads it, and then I think there was another vulnerability that told it to unpack it, or the directory traversal was in the unpacking process. Yeah. So
you extract the pack, and it uses the upgrade command to then write your file onto the file system where you want it to go.
I gotcha. Yep. So the thrift client. So thrift was the protocol they were using for an RPC, and they created a thrift client. Unauthenticated access to the thrift server, malicious tar file containing directory traversal, using a valid pack file, using remote pack download command, unpack that malicious thing. Then we cause pack to be extracted using the pack upgrade, writes the file where they want, which is just, that was from their summary. Even just reading their summary, you can kind of follow along with what the attack chain is in a couple sentences. So well done.
Yeah, those guys put out some of the best, most well-written articles from a technical side, especially on VMware stuff. So I was very impressed. It's been very difficult to get the lab set up to do this exactly how they did it, but it is a 9.8. It is a legitimate risk, and there's a lot of externally facing pieces that have this particular setup. So
yeah, what is this? What is vRealize Log Insight?
It's one of VMware's extended modules. So you got your vSphere, which manages multiple ESXi hosts, right? And then you have additional applications on top of that. The vRealize is like an orchestrator that allows you to do a lot of processes and tasks across your clusters. Mm-hmm. You can do everything from
enable secure boot,
configuration management. You can push patches. You can push products. You can do things to the virtual machines that are underlying. You can do logging and aggregation of performance data, real-time adjust the aggregation of that data to do things. Like, there's quite a bit to it. So that's one of their bigger products that handles a lot of stuff similar to like their VDI environment, right? Like the VDI stuff that they do isn't just a single VDI. Like, it has pools, it's got resources, they can have gold images. Those are spun up real time by applications. You can cluster those. Like, there's a lot to what VMware includes as part of their product suite.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Linux developers are evaluating a new DOITM.
Do it.
Which do it stands for Data Operand Independent Timing. It's an instruction mode that can be enabled with recent generations of Intel processors to ensure constant time execution for a subset of the Intel instruction set. Now, the article goes on to state, so I'm like, why is this relevant? They say, which can be particularly important for cryptographic algorithms. And this has been a known thing. It's been talked about in the Linux kernel community, if you will. And a kernel developer from Google actually, I think, pushed one of these commits. I don't know if it's in mainstream or where it is, but so discussions had fizzled out. Developer pushed a Linux kernel patch from Google. It was a Google developer. Enabled this change unconditionally for newer Intel CPUs, but also raises performance concerns. And what I figured out is they kind of lightly reference in this article, this is in direct response to the Heartsbleed attack. Is that Sam? You were really excited about the Heartsbleed thing, but this is a remediation for it potentially.
Sam was giving you stink face.
Yeah. I don't remember Heartsbleed.
No, was that before or after? Heartsbleed was the timing attack.
I caught it.
Frequency side channels.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't say timing attack. It was a frequency side channel is a much better, inaccurate description.
Yeah. I mean, I know most timing attacks, constant time code is the solution, but I'm not sure about Hertzbleed. I think it was a little more complicated.
They mentioned something in the article that it could help prevent against the frequency timing attacks.
Yeah, this is the frequency scaling of the processor, and I don't really understand that. Apparently, under certain conditions, the processor will change its clock rate or something, and I don't quite know what to make of that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, interesting. I thought it was a response to Hertzbleed.
Yeah, it might fix that in addition to the obvious timing attacks it would fix.
Okay. A lot of cool stuff in the Linux kernel. I mean, I think they're making really good progress and paying a lot of attention to security is what I've kind of gathered recently. Like, I think Linus before was kind of like, whatever, right? But now the Linux kernel community is kind of like, no, we can fix some of this stuff, and it's tricky business. So,
quick old timer question: are timing attacks, is that an equivalent term for a race condition, or is it something different?
You could regard it as a special case of a race condition, but I mean a race condition implies that you have an opportunity to do something if you do it at a critical time. And it's typically if you privilege escalation. But a timing attack is where you just measure the time it takes to do encryption, and from that you can deduce something about the key. So it's different.
Okay. Thanks.
It's very much like the side channel where you watch the radio emitted by your CPU, and from that you can deduce something about a cryptographic key.
I was thinking of other analogies, but I can't share them. So, just keep going.
I mean, you could, but we'll move.
No, but I get in trouble.
We'll move right along.
Moving right along.
Speaking of moving right along,
yes,
I'd love to hear about Sam's story number one, kind of because I got a follow on about AI stuff that I thought was humorous.
Yeah, see, I was very interested in this one because I've observed, like everybody else, that in about the last year or two, suddenly AI has exploded. They have these awesome things like ChatGPT and the earlier one that would draw images based on a paragraph of description. And I wonder why, because all my life they've been doing AI, and it's always been useless. Like originally written in Lisp and everything, and so slow it couldn't do anything.
Well, there was courses, to your point, to go back in history. I remember reading some book about the early days of computing and how there was artificial intelligence being studied at MIT in like the 60s, maybe even before that, right?
It's
like ever since we've had computers, computer scientists are like, we can do artificial intelligence because we watch way too many what are now old sci-fi movies, and like, no, we should study this, right?
Where the computers take over the humans.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, that's a common theme.
I mean, there's some famous big lies in computing that we've been talking about since the 60s, where they get grants every year where you say, we're going to make a robot soldier that will go shoot the bad guys on the battlefield. We're going to make a self-driving car that has 2 cameras and has stereo vision. And all these things turned out to be much more difficult than people thought. Right. So 50 years after they were supposed to be here, we still don't have them. And anyway, AI's been that way. We've had AI all along, but it's been so weak, it can't really do anything.
But recently, I think you bring up a great point, Sam, that recently there have been some advances. DALL-E can create images. I give it a description and can create an image. I'm like,
Midjourney, same thing.
And we're not the only podcast looking at that going, you could create like an album art custom for every single podcast, because I could give you all the metadata about the podcast. Like, I have that in a database as an example in our application. I could give that to you, and you could go generate an image that in a much less time than someone could create an image, and probably like way cooler and more abstract than you could create, certainly in less time.
Well, I don't know about that. When I tried using DALL-E, it created garbage for me. I think there's skill involved in using it, just like any other artistic tool.
I think you're absolutely correct. I've had mixed results. Sometimes I'm like, oh, that's cool. Like, I'd use that. And other times I'm like, that just looks like a bunch of random stuff.
There's too many fingers.
But you're right. You have to tune that one. ChatGPT is in the same vein. Yep. As we've seen, I think we've all seen the articles recently, right? It's all about how you ask it a question. I've seen articles about tips for asking it the question in the right way to achieve better results.
Well, I think a lot of the reason this has not gotten to where it is because of our availability for compute power and the ability to get the general public excited about it to where it monetizes and makes the compute worth what they're paying. It costs about $100,000 a day just in infrastructure costs to run ChatGPT. So you're trying to tell me that all of this free that we're giving away is not generating revenue to then substantiate and cover that later for interest, grants, programs, maybe even models and data set input to train the models better.
I was going to say it's learning. It's learning. That $100,000 a month to let people use it for free is to actually start training these models is the benefit.
So now there's enough interest that VCs are going to start funding this. They're going to have the availability of funds to continue a project that would otherwise not been sustainable, over the last 5 years up until now.
So we're training Skynet so it'll be better at killing us down the road.
Some of the stuff before they neutered it was very terrifying, like what it came up with, like how it would wipe out the human race. Like it was actually pretty spooky. So not that far off.
Anyway, the technical reasons why it's better now are pretty interesting. For one thing, it's the GPUs that are much faster at doing the processing. But the real thing that seems to have made a big breakthrough is Google called the transformer, where you can take any amount of data and you just break it down into a small matrix of numbers, and then you work on the numbers. So we can take a huge training set like all the images on the internet with alt text, which is how they trained DALL-E. And so that's, I think, the giant breakthrough. You simplify every input down to a little matrix of numbers, and then you just find matrices of numbers that match other matrices of numbers. And that's how you get the weird result of ChatGPT, where you can ask it to write something, and it will write something that looks about right. Like the paragraphs are right and they're on the right topic, but it doesn't really make a lot of sense. And if it's a scientific paper, it will just put references at the end that look good, but they're fake papers. So it's like you looked at an example through a blurry telescope and then made something that looked about right in general features.
Right.
Like my understanding of a lot of ChatGPT's success is the predictive text model. Like when you start typing a text message on your phone and it starts trying to figure out what the next word is going to be. Same sort of thing.
It's not quite right.
It's not.
It's going to be the super clippy. It's going to pop up and help you do things.
I think they should have called it super clippy.
I put up a reference on the Discord to the Star Trek original series episode about the ultimate computer, which was one of the early, which happened to be in 1968, which was the same year that 2001 was released. I have information on that, which is what more people know about computers getting smart, early examples. But what you were just saying, Sam, reminds me of the Star Trek episode, The Squire of Gothos, where they're on a planet where the alien is trying to make everybody feel comfortable, but the alien's really like in his years like a toddler, and so he's been looking at Earth and not realizing that he's looking at Earth from hundreds of years in the past. So he's created a castle, and it's kind of Victorian Renaissance times, and the crew that's beamed down or was sucked down to this planet. They're at a banquet table and they're eating all this beautiful looking food, but none of it has any flavor. And there's candelabras all over the place, but none of the candles are generating any heat. And they're like, there's something wrong here because everything is just the appearance without any of the depth or substance or flavor or anything like that.
Trained with an inefficient model.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we should just wait a few months, is what I think we're saying.
So
we'll get there.
So to caveat to this a little bit, maybe not, because my story that I carried over from last week, because I saw it this week, and I'm like, no, that's too funny, not. And Sam had an AI story. DARPA created a robot intended to find humans. Arguably in an attempt to create the smart soldier to go onto a battlefield so that it could find humans. Right. But unfortunately, the AI was very simple to defeat. So if you've ever played Metal Gear Solid, all of the soldiers that were trying to sneak up on this robot that could identify humans was to put a cardboard box over themselves and then just have a pair of legs walk up to the robot type of thing and bonk. But
I bet that would fool a Tesla too.
I bet it would. Yep. And part of that reason was because it had been the model that had been used to train it to identify humans identified the specific movement model of humans that didn't have boxes on them.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Right. It was full human or no human at all type of thing. It wasn't partial humans, and probably the wrong half of the partial humans if it had been.
Yeah, that's the fundamental problem with all these AIs is they don't have any sense. They don't understand what they're doing. They're just matching patterns they've seen. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of terrifying to imagine them controlling something like a car or a military drone based on this very shallow comprehension of the world.
Yep. And it's amazing what they're doing, and yet it still doesn't come close to what our feeble brains can do. And they still haven't been able to emulate what our brains can do.
There was a local story here in San Francisco that I saw where they said they now have all these robot taxis in San Francisco, and they create huge problems because they snarl up traffic in stupid ways. Like they will try to push onto a crime scene by pushing through the tape until a cop just had to smash the windshield to make it stop, and they'll surround a bus and just stall out, and they're constantly causing traffic disruptions because their driving is just terrible, and it's not easy to reach them to get them to do anything about it. So they say this whole self-driving taxi thing is something nobody really wants, and you'd be a lot better off with just humans driving, at least in the current iteration of it.
You just need a flipper zero to tell it that the red light never turned green.
Yeah, that's one thing that hasn't happened yet that we all expected is you're going to hack the robot taxis and make them do terrible things. They don't seem to need to be hacked to do terrible things, but maybe when they get a little better, then they'll start getting hacked.
Right.
I remember reading some story about something similar, that it was like all of a sudden a neighbor noticed that at the end of their cul-de-sac that this car would drive down and it would stop and then it would turn around and leave. And then a couple of days later it would just come down and stop and just sit there. And it was effectively one of these robot taxis that got confused and didn't know what to do, so it just stopped. And then a couple of weeks later, there were more and more taxis that just kept these more and more cars that just kept showing up to the point that the cul-de-sac became full of all these taxis just sitting there like, I don't know what to do.
Yeah, and that kind of thing is happening all the time in San Francisco.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, I think your story number one is where you want to go next.
It does, although I was going to have a parting thought that, we're really talking about the philosophical message of the movie War Games at the end of the day.
Yes.
So maybe that's the best hacker film after all.
Could be. I mean, it could be. It's certainly.
At least in this context.
In this context,
the message of War Games is never put all your eggs in the computer basket. You always want to have a human there.
I think Whopper was a far more interesting computing platform than the Gibson. I'll give you that.
Thank you. I will accept that concession. My story number one, I thought it was an interesting story just from, sort of a scratch your head. Okay, what do we do about this? Recently, was it last week, 2 weeks ago, was the World Economic Forum, and all sorts of stuff goes on there. And I get all sorts of stories pitched to me because I'm on the media mailing list. I'm not even sure where I saw this one, what the source was, but when I clicked on it, it looked interesting. It was Popular Mechanics. When was the last time we had a story on the security news?
More often than you might think.
Yeah, but I think like
that file format for the firmware more often than you think.
But I think Popular Mechanics runs this exact story, Jeff, like almost every year because it keeps them relevant.
Well, not this exact story, because
it's something similar,
but something basically that something really bad's about to happen because there's going to be some catastrophic cybersecurity event, something that's really bad, and apparently somebody presented a paper at this World Economic Forum to that effect. Not a whole lot of detail, but it's just kind of okay. So I think we'd all agree that things are really bad and something bad really could happen. What do we do about it? What do we think about it? What do we care about? Is it a Chicken Little, the sky is falling, or?
I think it's a call more for better threat modeling, right? And this is, I think, an example of threat modeling in this sense. I'm not sure there's a lot of data to back it up, but I like it in the sense that if we were to threat model and go like, what's the worst case scenario?
Yeah.
But then the value of threat modeling is coming up with the remediation, with the incident response as to how we mitigate the impact of the worst case kind of threat model. So to your point, Jeff, I think this is a valid exercise. I think it's something that is one of the reasons why we all work in the field, on the show and listening, is so that we can help prevent those really bad things from happening. And threat modeling is part of it, and being creative with your solutions and defenses. On the flip side, the scary part is, like in every science fiction movie, like no one listens. They don't want to believe the bad things can happen, and that therefore they happen.
Well, I think it's funny.
So let me say this. Sorry, Tyler. Let me throw this out. Otherwise, I'll forget it. I'm an old man. I don't know how many of you guys were in the workforce in the mid to late 90s, but in the early days of this whole thing that we called internet security back in the day, and then it was network security and information security, and somewhere along it was cybersecurity. We had a really hard time convincing anybody out in the private sector that bad things are going to happen, and no, really, there's bad things that could happen. And early in the 2000s, 9/11 came along, and I'll guarantee you, despite what everybody, I'm sure there's stories and research to disagree with what I'm about to say, but publicly at least, nobody was talking about terrorists flying planes into buildings. It might have been somewhere, but it wasn't a big, huge topic of discussion, and it wasn't afterwards, frankly. But what that incident did for a short period of time was got everybody listening. Where when you were coming in and talking about cyber attacks and what could go wrong on your network, and what could go wrong with your business, for a short amount of time people were listening and starting to pay attention to, oh, you mean something bad really could happen. I mean, I was naive, as many of us were back in those days, that would go out and do a pen test and come in and say, hey, we got root on all your systems, or we got domain admin rights, or whatever. It was all Unix back then. And we thought that should be self-evident that that's bad. And yet people were like, yeah, well, so what? What do you do with that? And I'm like, anything. And we couldn't make that argument. So I don't know. I'm conflicted on how far we go with sort of these doomsday scenarios, because I mean, even, like the Loft testifying before Congress, we could bring down the internet in 20 minutes.
Right. But I think the stakes.
But why did nobody do that?
Well, because the stakes increasingly have gotten higher. The internet is way more important. I mean,
it's not just
the Morris worm took down the internet. But it was like, no one cares. There's no commerce going on the internet. Like no commerce, no porn. No one really cared. 9/11, I think, brought a visibility to physical attacks. Most definitely. I think the cyber attacks kind of rode on those coattails a bit. I think it's Richard Clark that talks about the history behind that. In his book, The Fifth Domain, I think talks about, there's a couple of books that talk about the history behind that. The folks that were advising, and it was Richard, I think, it comes to mind, advising on, and some of the cybersecurity stuff still, it got a little more visibility during the late 90s, early 2000 time frame. It was still kind of pushed aside because we're very concerned about the terrorist threat, and obviously so, and we should have been. And then you got early 2000s, post 9/11, it was friggin' Armageddon with network worms, right? I mean, 2003 started this like catastrophic failure on the internet on mostly Windows systems that created many of these worms. Slammer and all that stuff. But the internet was still, in my mind, not as important as it is today, certainly. We still were kind of the dot-com, bubble in the midst of that. And then as time progressed, we had all these other incidents, and I think it's underscored the importance, not Petya, WannaCry, and things of that nature was a big turning point as well. So I think we're still on the
I agree. There's certainly much more dependence on the internet these days. I should also add that a lot of the focus in the late 90s was the Y2K bug, and all the gloom and doom associated with that. Which we're going to revisit in 38, 39 when the Unix clock runs out.
Hopefully, it's the same kind of. I remember panicking for no reason.
I think the issue here is not everybody is used to the level of evil that we are consistently talking about bringing up from the offensive side, because we've all been doing this 25 years, right? You put this in something like Popular Mechanics, or the global VP or whatever response of Interpol, and he talks to a generally political environment. Like, yeah, they hear some doom and gloom. It's usually tied to some geopolitical and economic crash, some missile, maybe a cyber attack, ransomware. But no one's really bringing the full picture that we've been bringing for 25 years. The threat landscape has changed, but the level of risk to humanity has never changed. We still have shitheads. We still have horrible people in the world that want to blow each other up, kill in mass quantities, and make a lot of money. Like, none of that's changed. We just can do it at a faster speed. So really, all the doom and gloom, like, maybe this is my naivety finally catching up with the lack of youth. Like, it's all the same. We're always going to have that risk, and we will always, as humanity, find ways to creatively get around that, protect it, and I think we're doing a better job than we have been doing. Now, yes, we are probably one geopolitical event away from, some really bad times, and these actors and ransomware groups that are hitting a lot of very large companies that have very large dollars, and all the leaking of personal identifiable information, all of that together, yeah, it's a pretty crap time for most people on the internet, but it's not going away. We still have increase in products, new companies, startups, money going out there. Everything is still moving forward, and it always will be. So, like, does the doom and gloom need to be brought up like that? Probably not. There's more constructive ways to build allies, build redundancies, take on these bad actors, get creative with how we're doing it, provide the pointy end of the spear with a little bit better point, and have some more people there. All those things are going to keep happening.
The curmudgeon in me wants to. No, I agree with a lot of what you said, Tyler. But the curmudgeon in me really gets spun up when these types of conversations about gloom and doom and all the bad things that could happen are simply brought up, and I'm going to very grossly generalize, in a sales pitch.
Gross.
You get what I'm saying? That's what gets my goat, and that's where it's, I find it hard to have the reasonable, intelligent conversations. Nobody's going around and talking.
Be very specific about what you're talking about, doom and gloom, right? Like, if Ukraine actually goes through, we have Poland getting involved, then Germany has to get involved. We've got the ransomware groups that are now going after allies and nation states. We get cyber attacks where U.S. gets involved with Russia. We collapse a cryptocurrency market that's worth billions, and then our national economy goes down because we've crashed some stocks. Okay, that's a bad day. There's some doom and gloom. But be specific.
We got to reel in the doom and gloom, right? I mean, I think any one of us, on the show or listening, could probably go give a presentation when we talk about doom and gloom, and then, pitch a product. It has to be, in my mind, very specific to the problem that you're solving and be backed by data, right? For example, if I pitch Eclipsium, I back that up with data. I'm like, here's data points. Like, here's the CISA KEV. Here's, from our own database, I can tell you certain data points about the firmware we've analyzed, right? It has to be very specific. It can't just be, I think, Jeff, your curmudgeon comes out, and so does mine, when it's just generic doom and gloom. Like, oh my God, people are hacking stuff and they can impact all these things. So it's like, well, yeah, we know that. You have to be very specific, and I think you have to back it up with data, because you do have to define the problem. And I think people take the shortcut because it's one of the hardest things you have to do in a pitch is define the problem concisely in that pitch. And people just pull from like random things, like, oh, there was this news article, like this stuff is blowing up over here, so therefore everyone should pay attention to security and buy my product. Like, that's not how it works, right? Speaking of doom and gloom, let's talk about some doom and gloom. Cisco end of lifing. In this one, really, it grinds my gears. So there's a remote code execution vulnerability in Cisco routers that have end of life.
Yep.
From looking at these seem to be their small business line, which I think is for lack of a better term, like the redheaded stepchild kind of analogy, right? Like it's the, oh yeah, like it's
not a big profit maker.
Yeah, it doesn't get a lot of love from.
However, ends up
Cisco.
in ICS environments all over the place because they're small.
And yeah, and in a lot of small, it ends up in my home, right? I've got some of this stuff deployed in my home, and what I realized was it really was like this line that Cisco wasn't paying a lot of attention to, because the feature set is super friggin' weird. Like if you're used to working with Cisco gear and you start typing commands, like your commands have been neutered. Like they're there.
It was probably an acquisition that they tried to shoehorn iOS command like stuff into.
Maybe, or I think it's just because it's easier to take an existing product and scale it down and take features away than it is to build a new product with a smaller subset of features. So I think what they did was they took iOS, Larry, and they were just like, let's rip a whole bunch of this stuff out, have a smaller code base, and produce this hardware and target it towards small business, which I think as a business venture probably didn't work out too well for Cisco when they started looking at the books. And so people like me and many others end up with this gear, and it's super weird to work with. It makes me want to just go buy Ubiquity.
It's like the old RVSs. It was like a mix between the DDWRT and the iOS. I think this was like a BusyBox like web interface that they neutered, like you said, all the iOS stuff over into like their consumer DDWRT platform and made it business.
Oh, I mean, don't get me wrong when I say this type of stuff. I have very much seen Cisco iOS running on third-party developed stuff that they effectively it was a Linux subsystem that they emulated Cisco gear on top of. I've tested those, so I wouldn't be surprised if it was something similar.
Maybe I am going to go picking on Cisco, but like I read this article and I'm just like, what? So Cisco noted that an exploit is floating around on the internet, although it has not been made publicly available. I'm confused by this statement because if it's on the internet, doesn't that mean like you're assuming the public can't access the internet? Is there like a maybe?
So they mean it's backed up in VirusTotal's database. Gotcha.
I guess we're all laughing because we either have access or know people that have access to the dark places, not the dark web, but I mean like the dusty corners of the internet where you might find this kind of stuff.
I'm pretty sure like, Tyler's on the dark web.
Yeah, like I would go to Tyler. I would be like, "Can you get me a copy of that exploit? Because I want to see it." Right? And there's like people. I have like the short list of people that I go to. Like, can you? Like, I'm not seeing this in the more public places that I look, but I know like you have access to the less public, but it's all still publicly available. Okay, but now Cisco says, but the good news is that Cisco is unaware of these exploits being used maliciously. Like I get that. I respect, Cisco's threat team. What is their threat team called?
It's not Talos.
Talos. Thank you. I had mental blank. Talos is amazing, like absolutely amazing. But I don't seem to remember a requirement where if you're a malicious actor that you report exploitation and your exploits and give them to the vendor to report that they're being used in the wild. Like, this is not a requirement of malicious actors. So the fact that Cisco hasn't seen it, well, on the surface might be a good indicator, doesn't mean it's not being used in the wild, and Cisco just can't see it. But again, Talos also does a really good job of keeping tabs on those things, so there is that. Then the next statement, like, I was just like, this is bad on all fronts. They actually put this in their statement. So I'm quoting directly. Cisco stated in their advisory that they have not released software updates to address the vulnerabilities described in the advisory, and that there are no workarounds that address these vulnerabilities.
And they're not planning on doing it.
So we're not going to fix it.
The implication.
And we have no workarounds. So that means like these devices are end of life. You can't really... Can you put other firmware on? Here's where I'm a proponent of open source projects and their ability to put firmware on these devices, but often there's a lot of limitations from the manufacturer to prevent you from doing this so they can maintain a support contract. But what happens...
Talking about you, Meraki.
Not going to name names, but apparently we are. So let's just name names. I mean, we can add Cisco to this list for this, line of devices because they've been like... End of life, meaning that they're not just going to fix the vulnerabilities.
So that hardware just goes.
I have a little bit of a different take on this. I'm actually kind of impressed that Cisco actually talks about it, because I'm not aware, and I could be wrong, of many vendors that actually keep tabs of their old products and actually notify about vulnerabilities. It's interesting that this article is coming up this week, because I had a client ask me just a couple days ago, hey, we're in the process of replacing, and this is a retail client, so they have lots of different brick and mortar retail locations, and at each of their retail locations they have a local firewall, which is some little similar type of device, really. Different brand. I'm not going to say what brand it is, but they're in the process of upgrading because what they're using is going end of service in a couple months, and they're like, there's no way we're replacing all of these before our PCI compliance is due. So we're planning on doing a compensating control. Is that the right path? And the short answer is yes. But then I started looking into it. I'm like, what actually are they going to do? Because the idea of a compensating control is you're coming up with other methods of meeting the spirit of whatever security requirement is in question. And for PCI, why end of life and end of service is an issue is because there's this requirement to patch all known vulnerabilities within 30 days of release of the patch. And the problem has always been, but what if there's not a patch release?
Yes.
The overarching problem, which is what we're all talking about here, is, and in this case, there's actually a vulnerability out there. There's a problem that somebody's discovered, and there is going to be no patch. So my question to my esteemed colleagues is, what are some things that organizations can do if they've got these Cisco devices, or if they have certain other devices that are firewalls or some sort of networking device, and there is no quick way to upgrade them, and there's no patch coming for the known vulnerability? What are some practical ways to protect the environments when these type of scenarios exist?
Oh,
I know.
Maybe. All right, you first, Larry.
Replace them.
Yeah, but so if you're not going to replace them, I agree with Larry, actually, because I'm in this exact situation.
They are replacing them. Yes. They just acknowledge they can't.
It's a lot of work
before their deadline.
I feel their pain, Jeff. I feel their pain because I'm in the situation with my firewall at home that has not just firmware level issues that I've uncovered, but also I'm on an older version of pfSense that's a nightmare to upgrade because I neglected it for so long and stupidly trusted a little thing in the UI that said, oh, you're up to date, which really just meant I was up to date on the latest code branch that I was on. Then I need to dig deeper into pfSense to go, oh, you need to go from 2.2 to 2.3 to 2.4 to 2.5. But if you're on the latest of 2.3, it's oh, there's no upgrades available. So I'm like, oh, I didn't. It's my fault. Totally my fault.
Yep.
So one thing is, look at which components are most vulnerable in the firewall component or switch and Cisco router. So one of my recommendations that I actually wrote as part of this article was a lot of the vulnerabilities in the Cisco case have to do with the web management interface. The web management interface, it just so happens on these Cisco devices, is friggin' god awful and has tons of vulnerabilities. So just disable that stuff. That's not always going to be the answer. The answer is it depends. But if you can disable the more vulnerable components and or protect them better if you disable it. If you need the web interface, protect it, and don't expose it anywhere it doesn't need to be exposed is one thing. When I look at this from more of a firmware device issue, I really like, and this was exposed to me through my day job, and I discovered this. For example, I have laptops, maybe other devices. My firewall is actually one example where I can't upgrade the firmware. The manufacturer has not provided updates to the firmware on it. And if this is a router firewall or a PC, like in my case, that's running firewall software, if that's the only update and the last update from the OEM is from 2020 or 2018. And I've checked, they haven't released a new firmware. What I can do is I can monitor that firmware, and my day job company has the capability to do this as an example. I can look at that firmware, and it can tell me if it's ever changed, right? I can constantly pull the firmware from that device. I can analyze it. I can put an agent on that system, monitor the firmware. If the firmware changes, that's really bad because there is no update from the vendor.
How do you do that across 50 different IoT devices in your house, though, or on products that your family has?
IoT is
things
harder.
That are outdated, things that are staying on and not getting wiped, but still connected to the internet. Like, this is a problem not just for security professionals. This is a systemic problem across the social, economic problem where we can't get rid of devices. We don't have a good means for recycling devices. The devices that we keep around are outdated and often low cost to buy. Manufacturers don't have any incentive to fix them because there's a minimum cost viability that they have to achieve to sell these at the price that we as consumers expect. So all those things together just lends itself to a perfect storm for continued IoT hell that is going to lend itself to exploitation of networks, people's personal devices, identities. Like, all of these things aren't going away.
And I don't have perfect solutions, but my other solution too is you can put open source firmware on a number of these devices. Now,
assuming
you can,
and that you can put a modern enough version of an open source firmware on it.
Correct. And provided the open source project continues to support your hardware. Core Boot is open source UEFI based firmware. Like, they based the original code on the Tiano Core original code. Right now they've drifted and made a lot of modifications to that, but it is open source firmware that you can put on UEFI enabled devices. They maintain a supported devices list. If you go read their release notes, they just came out with a new version this week. I should have put it in the notes. They said, we support all these new devices. I'm like excited. There's like an MSI motherboard on there. And MSI is notorious for not continuing support of their firmware. And so I'm like, this is exciting. I know, I'm sorry. But this isn't a laptop. This is a motherboard. But there's another list that came along with the Core Boot update that said, we're no longer supporting these devices. So even open source projects that may continue, you may be able to take an OEM provided hardware who stopped firmware support in UEFI in this example, I'm going to put Core Boot on that. It's going to be supported for a longer period of time, but then even Core Boot's like, after a certain amount of time, we can't support it either. And so, like, now you've got to replace, back to Larry's point, where we started this discussion, you got to replace the device.
Replace it.
All right, so you're taking one tact, which is do something to upgrade the device, even if it's install your own stuff on it in some way. Let me add a few more data points, and you'll appreciate this, Paul. The particular device is, I went off to plugins.tenable.com to see what kind of vulnerabilities are known on this device, and the first things that popped up, because I doing the little word search, were like 6, 7, 8 years old, and then lo and behold, the management interface that's used to manage these devices, there was a vulnerability discovered January 2023. Which is sort of analogous to this Cisco thing where they've discovered a real vulnerability. What's problematic in PCI, like, my client is not going to do that. I mean, they're in the process of upgrading these devices. It's a timing problem for them. Interestingly enough, and I don't know if you'll agree with me in giving a little bit of props to the PCI Council, but in version 4, because I've been going through it exhaustively the past week or two, they've always, or for very long, they've required you to do an inventory of all your systems. They've added in version 4 that not only are you supposed to inventory your systems within your environment, but as part of that inventory, you're now in version 4 needing to keep track of the end of life and end of service dates. I'm like, that's actually pretty smart.
Yep, I like that. Yeah, because we need to get ahead of the problem. And I empathize with your client, Jeff, because like I said, at home, I'm in that boat. And, I can just swap out my firewall. But I'm like,
But I got to swap out my firewall.
I got to go through and see what
you don't do that by hundreds.
And this is one
particular client by hundreds over very dispersed geographical locations.
Mm-hmm. Yes, correct. Correct.
So
it's an issue.
The real question I'm asking is, given that there is some unknown possibility of a vulnerability that could lead to some sort of exploitation. I mean, the usual things that are done in terms of compensating controls like this, and I've been asking my co-workers on Slack, and they're like, well, install whitelisting, do this, do that. And I'm like, on a firewall? Can you put whitelisting solution on a firewall? That doesn't seem to make sense to me.
We call them allow lists now, Jeff.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, that begs the question, are we at a point in a society and from a technological standpoint that we really should be looking at end-of-lifing devices faster based on cost and availability of updates? Like, just flat out making them stop work at certain dates based on the firmware of last update. Like, are we at that point where we really need to start considering about the general health and sanity and well-being of the internet and the ability for people to fix and keep open source stuff out there? I'm all for right to repair and not closed sourcing everything and not end of lifing everything, because it really pisses me off when I got good hardware sitting around that I can't do anything with. But on the second side of that, like, thinking that companies aren't going to change if there's no monetary incentive for them to fix some of this, then is it better for them to end of life that based on the last time they update the firmware and just kill the device so that they're not sitting out there and being vulnerable?
I don't think like the business or us should have to incur that cost, because I know I could probably get a few more years out of my firewall, and now they've basically forced my hand to force me to upgrade, and that just feels wrong. Like, at what point do we have enough features and capacity in our devices to go, we can use this 2 or 3 years longer than our hand is being forced? And that's frustrating to me. It's one of the reasons why I really like open source, but at the same time, you're kind of beholden to the OEM or manufacturer in a lot of different ways, because they control how often those software updates, those firmware updates are coming down for that device, which I think is unfortunate. Like, I think we could get by a lot longer without being forced to buy something. Right? This is the Apple model, right? They're going to try and force you to buy a new phone every year. Like, how many more new features do I need? Like, Microsoft Word, how many new features did I need in Microsoft Word when it was a fat client on my computer? Like, it already has I can create a document, like, seriously, but I got to pay for an upgrade. This trend has been continuing in our technology industries, that we have to update to get those new features. Now they're forcing our hand, going, you have to update if you want the latest security updates for it. And I think that's wrong.
I blame Steve Jobs.
Yeah, it is. I mean, a lot of it is.
Like,
it's the Apple culture.
That's a brick, because the management application was running on some version of, I don't even remember the code. I know I've talked to Larry about it, but I can't launch it because the software went out of service, so I can't use my printer anymore.
But it's
a perfectly good printer.
But it's kind of like the ThinkPad as a server. I thought this person was a true hacker spirit. I was like, what if I take an old ThinkPad and I modify it? So I take some of the cases off to improve airflow, and I mount it in something, and I turn off all the sleep settings and customize it. I could use it as a server. And that's great. But I can tell you, like, your older ThinkPads have probably stopped getting firmware updates and not just from the manufacturer, but from all your subcomponents as well. And those could have vulnerabilities. But conceivably, I mean, if you follow this person's guide, like, I thought it was pretty cool. Like, I thought it was a great hack to be like, I want to use it. Like, you got an old laptop laying around. I mean, it's probably got more power than your typical Raspberry Pi. Like, you get a lot of life out of that. And by taking apart the laptop and converting it to a server, that's pretty cool. But the problem is you're not going to get updates, for it.
So if the manufacturers did more secure coding, had better security practices to begin with, we would have less of these vulnerabilities, and the hardware risk would therefore be lower.
But there's a tipping point too. There's a tipping point too where new vulnerabilities are being found. Even like the best OEMs, I still find that, like, people are finding new vulnerabilities that they like just didn't know about, and some are worse than others. I agree. Like, some do a terrible job. Some do a terrible job of.
Like we see that we had vulnerabilities that we talked about on the show a couple weeks ago that like had been in existence for 20 years.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's an interesting game of balance about how much do you secure it, how well can you secure it, how well can your practices be to have zero vulnerabilities when in fact the only secure computer is one that's turned off and buried into 3 feet of concrete, but it's not usable.
I do have to say, make sure you go read my story number 10, the ThinkPad as a server. Especially like you're building your own home lab and stuff, you can find out-of-service ThinkPads for like a couple $100. I was listening to a Linux podcast, and they were trying to find like the cheapest, most usable laptop to put Linux on. And I tell you what, like some of their options weren't horrible. I mean, I wouldn't run that as my laptop necessarily, but if you needed an extra laptop or for a family member, or you're going to convert into a server, like there's some pretty cool stuff out there, but you're going to be limited.
That also goes back to your risk threat profile, right? Like if this is a home lab and this is segmented off from the internet, maybe it's natted, but it's a segmented part of your network that you're not connected to your phone.
Maybe you want it vulnerable for that purpose. Maybe you want it vulnerable. Yeah,
those are perfectly good use cases.
The vulnerabilities are maybe not network accessible. You need physical access, and some of those types of things are perfectly reasonable. I mean, Paul, you and I'm assuming you know Axon. From Instagram, Twitter, that we've known through the SecKC folks for a long time, was one of our earlier listeners to the show. Like his daily driver is a 10-year-old like Panasonic Toughbook type thing. Like that's what he uses every day with OpenBSD on it, and like there's some dedication there because for him that old hardware has that feel, that retro feel, and
with open source, you can use it. I mean, but Windows 11 isn't even come close to running on something like that. And I mean, that greatly concerns me is the specs to run Windows 11 now. And Microsoft just announced that they're no longer selling Windows 10. So, like, I mean, I'm sure you can still find it, get it, like whatever, but that's not what I'm saying. But, like, they've made the official announcement that, like, they're no longer selling it, that it's transitioning to Windows 11. Look at the specs for what you need to run Windows 11. I mean, you're talking about what hardware that's manufactured and sold in the past
3 years.
3 is it 3?
Yeah, it's not that long.
Somewhere between 3 and 5 would be my guess. That's just my guess. TPM 2.0, you're talking 3 and 5 is still my guess if you say TPM 2.0.
So when does Windows 10 go end of service?
That's a good. I don't know when it goes end of service. I know recently they've stopped selling it.
Or end of support.
End of support. Yeah, I'm not sure what that is. Someone knows the answer to that. But.
I mean, I deal with national and international retailers that they're what we call the cash registers, the point of sale systems that are running on most of the time these Windows devices. They're looking at having to upgrade them by the tens, if not hundreds of thousands. I'm not saying they're my client, but let's say you walk into a Target or a Walmart or a Kohl's. How many point of sales are at the front? Maybe 10 or 12. Plus, there might be a few in the back at the
and so what we're saying, Jeff, like is that. in 2 to 3 years, if they're running Windows 10, they're no longer going to be supported, and in that time frame, they would have to upgrade tens to hundreds of thousands of computers. That it's not just a software upgrade. Likely, it could also be a hardware upgrade because you need more modern hardware to run Windows 11. And here is a big giant corporation forcing this on people when we could conceivably be running these as appliances for way longer than 2 to 3 years.
I've been doing PCI for a while, and they've been through this gyration for replacing Windows 2000, replacing Windows XP.
They did a good job from XP to 7, right?
And they don't want to have to replace the hardware every 3 to 5 years. Right. They would rather it last 20 years because they
would rather it last, but they have taken into account that it will not because they've amortized these things in a 3 to 5 year period, which they probably if they're on Windows 10 now, they'll probably skip Windows 11 and go to Windows 12. because that becomes within the 3 to 5 year amortization. You would think. I mean,
you would think,
but
no.
And likely because they skipped the previous version of Windows to get to Windows 10.
Yeah.
And now they're going to get that much more life potentially out of their systems.
I mean, but who knows if there even is going to be a Windows 12?
Yeah, but it'll probably be Windows 77 or something.
That sounds reasonable, Larry. That's not the way, at least they did it back. I had clients that were, you would think that if they were upgrading from 2000, they would go beyond XP to whatever the next one was, 7. But no, they were iteratively stepping. I mean, even the client that I have now that is getting ready to replace the outdated firewall that they're using at all their retail locations because it's end of service this year, end of support. The ones that they're upgrading to go end of support in 2025.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and as far as I can tell, the vendor has, these are like, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old versions. They've got much newer stuff, but
the newer stuff is more expensive.
Yeah, and you'd think it would last longer, but it doesn't because even those go on.
Yeah,
it's
I mean, speaking of upgrading, you got to upgrade your Lexmark printers too.
Before we get too far, I know Sam needs to make his exit.
Oh,
so I wanted to say goodnight to Sam.
But Sam had. Sam, you got to talk about your story number 3.
The
conductivity. Magic angle graphene.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about this one because this is physics and material science, and I used to do some of this long ago. So graphene is a 2-dimensional surface. It's only 1 atom thick, and it's incredibly easy to make. You just take graphite and use Scotch tape and pull a little of it up, and you get these single atom thick layers of carbon in a hexagonal array. So that's graphene. And then it turns out that if you make 2 layers of this stuff and you rotate it to the magic angle of 1.1 degrees, now it can be superconducting. Oh, and I don't think anybody really knows exactly why. But then you put layers on the outside of that of another material and rotate that to 30 degrees, and now you can send an electric pulse in the outside stuff and make the inside graphene superconducting, and it will stay that way without the application of more electricity. It will just flip like a switch.
Wow, I mean, like it'll absorb the energy and just.
Yes,
that's like right out of sci-fi, man.
Yes, because you created a ferromagnetic like magnetism, so it can flip to another place, and then you can send the pulse and flip it back. So you have got a transistor, you've got an on-off switch for electricity without silicon, without holes, without doping, a whole new material to make chips out of.
I was thinking you could make a suit and make me Electro Man.
Well, did you just see his eyes light up when you said that?
Well, there was a related story about a company making Windows in Japan. They're making Windows that will let the 5G and 6G in, and they are using invisibility technology in the Windows, which has been developed, I think, by Toyota about 5 years ago, where you just have a grid of imperfections in the window at the right wavelength that will cause light to pass through, and deflect it by a certain angle. So
you can turn me into Invisiman.
They did in fact make an invisibility shoot of this, but it only works at 1 wavelength.
Oh. Is graphene's raw material, is it more attainable and in a wider array of things that we can actually mine, so that we're not going after all these rare earth metals and causing economic geopolitical crashes in Venezuela?
Yes, absolutely. It's just plain carbon. It's like one of the most common materials in the world. You don't need anything fancy. The cost of goods is going
to go down too.
Yes, and we can't. It'll be another 10 years of development to make practical devices, and then we'll find out what it's really good for. But it gives us a whole new start with a whole new family of hardware.
Time to invest in some graphene mining. All right.
You don't even Kyler. You don't even need to mine it. It's carbon.
Get it from the coal mining bits. Okay,
get it from that new coal-fired power plant that went on, turned on in Pennsylvania. It's carbon neutral.
It's a lot easier to obtain than vibranium. So there's that.
Yes.
Yeah.
What?
The question is
Marvel. Have you not watched Marvel?
Yep.
Read the comics?
It's Tyler. Of course,
No, I haven't.
So Sam, graphene on the inside. What's the magic substance on the outside, and is that hard to acquire?
I've forgotten. I don't think it was anything too exotic, though. Let me see if I can find out what the outside layer is.
It was vibranium.
Now, this is called Twistronics, by the way, and
rubber cement.
Let me search for 30.
Boron nitride?
Twistronics?
Crazy.
Is that the name of the company?
Nitride. That sounds right. Boron nitride is what's on the outside, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Is Twistronics make adult toys? Is that
They're about
that's
to.
different.
Self-powered.
You call these adult toys? Yeah. I think these are adult toys. Better transistors. Anyway, yeah, boron nitride, which I think also is nothing exotic.
Sounds exotic.
Interesting.
Yeah. So anyway, I mean, it has no immediate application, but I think it'll be, important for the future of computing.
And making a suit for my dog to turn my dog into Electra Dog.
Well, that's a possible application.
And invisible.
Yeah. And invisible. That's right.
Speaking of meaningless files and code, Russians' Yandex leak is very interesting and not really all that useful yet.
The who what now?
Yeah, the core source code was leaked out of Yandex. The interesting thing about it is you can learn how the Russian Google works, but you can also learn how the real Google works because they copied the real Google.
There
so
is
it
some
amounts to
very
a second-order
interesting
leak
code
from Google.
overlays there.
Yeah.
Interesting.
No, it's about 45 gigs of data from Yandex. Again, the source code was leaked. It was, I believe, one of their former employees. And it was obviously political for the war. Speaking of the Russian war, we'll take a small segue right there. If anybody is interested in supporting anything Ukraine, we've got a friend that has a nonprofit for housing for women and children over there that is looking for funding immediately. So any friends, or we have a donate now link. I'm going to plug that right now.
Yeah, please put that.
We've been working on trying to get them funding, finding philanthropy, any group that is providing funding. They've got basically to the end of the week before 100 people are displaced. So one of the groups I'm doing some pro bono work with is definitely in need of some money. So help support that.
And
pass
is that,
it on to your friends.
I was reading, Tyler, is that like former U.S. veterans
Yes.
have a foundation that's also that is helping with this effort?
Correct. Yes, this is a long-standing organization. They've done really good work, but they've built a housing thing right on the Poland border for Ukrainian women and children. Currently has about 100 women and children, but they can scale up and scale down. But the cost right now for gas and food and keeping the place warm based on the electrical grid has gotten to the point where the founders are now funding some of this out of their own pocket to kind of keep it going because they had some funding fall through. So. We'll post the story in Discord on the news page, but definitely if you know any philanthropy and they have a lot of money, we're looking for a lot of money. If you want to donate, $100, $10, anything's going to help these people kind of not get displaced. So, great cause. Anyway, back to Russian and Yandex.
Yeah, no, that was. I'm glad you mentioned that. Thank you, Tyler. I wanted to talk about, the printer vulnerability. Lexmark has a remote code execution that affects 100 different printer models. The best I can tell is this is an SSRF that leads to remote code execution. Everything I've read about it, all the articles say there's a proof of concept available. I haven't seen the proof of concept to look at it and go how easy or difficult this is to exploit. I mean, if you're so inclined, you could probably reverse engineer the patch. Lexmark produced a patch for this. Reverse engineering the patch is probably, I haven't done it, but for this instance, but it's probably not all that difficult to find an SSRF in the patch. That's just my guess. But the proof of concept does exist. I haven't seen it yet. Shodan did not have much to say about port 65002, which is where this runs. And I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical. Like, is John not scanning for that port?
WDS. It's a WDS port, is what it is.
What is WDS?
That's the directory service. It's one of the directory services for printing and file.
So many acronyms for that wireless distribution system.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember what that one reference to.
Wasn't that also one of the ports that was on our VMware log thing?
It's a common 65,000 is a common port range for like a web management, an API, a firmware update. I'm working on some stupid Bose speakers right now that had corrupt firmware, funny enough.
But what's interesting though, if I run that port through Shodan, I only get like 9 results.
Just for that port?
Well, those printers are probably not super exposed to the internet.
Okay,
right?
I wasn't. I did it quick, and I was like, "That's weird."
Yeah, I'd argue though that 65,002 is probably exposed to the internet a lot more, not just on those printers, for other stuff like.
For other stuff, there was a lot of others when I looked. Well, not a lot, but in the results I got, it was like weird stuff. It wasn't like Lexmark's printer. It was like 9 things of like weird stuff. Basically.
Well, the funny thing about Lexmark's printers too that most people don't know is many of the standard printers, there's 2 types of printers that are just rebranded or white labeled. Lexmark relabels for several large companies, including Dell. So if you have a Dell, odds are that the firmware and the software running on there are very similar and probably have the exact same vulnerability.
Dell doesn't make printers; they license the printer.
Most places
stuff.
don't make printers.
Right. There's only a few people that actually. Yeah, it's like HP and Lexmark and a couple others, right?
So it's all good. You just get Boris Federlich to fix it.
That's right. Boris will fix it for you. Yep. He's all over this.
Yeah, it is interesting, and I imagine that this one's not too hard to replicate because it is a web-facing service. Again, I'm not super surprised it's not exposed, but if you're on an internal network and you can gain access to these, we've shown all kinds of weird stuff you can do. You can maintain persistence. You can have a separate operating system, a busy box in there. You can run apps out of there. You can do scans and make VPN connections. You can capture credentials, print jobs, and send those out. So there's a ton of stuff you can do from printers that people just don't think of from a risk standpoint.
And printers
are a big risk.
That's an interesting perspective too, Tyler, because if you think about, for how many years we would have used something like a printer as not only a pivot, but a data source, like capture the print jobs, sent them elsewhere, and you name it. But think about since early 2020, how nearly useless printers have become, in that so much of our documentation and our electronic signatures and all that type of stuff are done not on paper now. Like, we truly, pandemic forced not only a lot of remote work, but because of that, potentially forced a lot of digital office.
Which is disappointing because I was always hopeful.
Right?
But I was always hopeful. That there would be like a big hack with printers, or to Tyler's point, multifunction devices. I don't. There was a lot of research on it. There was I did some testing in the printer here locally. There was some great research that has been published in the past 20 years about it, but we never. I don't think it ever came. It took so long to come to fruition that we don't rely on printers as much, to your point, Larry, and so we kind of missed the boat. I think there was a lot of other opportunities for malicious actors that printers never really. It's kind of disappointing. It's always been near and dear to my heart. I love hacking printers.
I found out yesterday that on Preview in the Mac, if you open a PDF, you can use it to capture a signature and paste it into the PDF, save it, and I don't need to print that shit out anymore. Sign it and then scan it in again. Nope, I can do that all.
Software exists for that on Linux. I mean, that's and you can go to a SaaS offering if you're comfortable. If you're comfortable uploading your documents to a SaaS provider, there's dozens of them. You can upload the document. You can use their web technology to sign it and send it on its way.
See, but now here's the caveat to that, right? Is while we have adopted a much greener stance, most regulatory places require paper hard copies and or still print out stuff. Anybody that's doing financial stock brokerage stuff, your mortgage application, anything in a bank is going to get a digital signature, but it's also going to be printed out and saved as a hard copy. And those images are often stored on the printer. You can recapture those print jobs or anything that's scanned back into that or sent to that printer. So you end up with a digital and a physical vulnerability that, again, people just aren't thinking of the printer as a weak point that is often exploited and not talked about.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, Tyler,
we've been doing this for quite a while, and we've done some big hacks.
I was going to say, Tyler, yeah, I sold a house during the beginning of the pandemic, and I'm like, I actually had to go to an office with full COVID protocol to sign documents, physical, actual documents, as opposed to doing electronic signature. And I bet there are like that type of industry that much of that hasn't changed, but there are certainly industries that, like, yeah, you don't have to put actual pen to paper anymore and print stuff.
I wanted to talk about a defensive article that, on a lighter note, I think is a really, really awesome, like it's actually one of my favorite stories of this week, and it's not offensive in nature at all. It's totally defensive. It's my story number 12, and this is threat and vulnerability hunting with application server error logs, and this came from Wix. It's come from the team at Wix. Yeah. So I think we should all really pay attention to this. This also, you read it, I'm like, oh, like, why didn't I, why isn't this more of a thing? I'm sure it's not the first person to have this idea. Obviously, as we've covered, security and hacking for over 20 years now. No. Well, we've been in it for over 20 years. Been covering it since 2005. And I'm like, this can't be the first. But I think it was really well written and a novel idea, even if it's building upon previous attempts. So they say that the basic assumption of our monitoring idea is that certain exceptions should never appear in production applications that were written securely. For example, SQL syntax errors should not occur when a query is written properly, using valid parameterized query library, for example. Such exceptions may indicate that the actual syntax of the SQL query changed due to a runtime aspect, SQL injection, as an example, or user input that leads to SQL injection that was not properly handled or was unexpected. So they say if you reverse this logic, the process becomes clear. Instead of searching for injections using penetration tests and then finding evidence in the log, find the errors in the logs and then reverse engineer them to build the injection payload and find the vulnerability. I'm like, well, that's
end user pen testing.
I'm like,
Great.
That is,
love it.
That's like why didn't I think of that kind of? And again,
we used to call these anomalies. Nothing.
Yeah, but you're working in the. What I like how they wrote it, Jeff, was the kind of shift of mindset to look for the errors in the logs and work backwards. And they developed at Wix this entire system to do that across, oh my God, 1,000 applications and like terabytes of logs. Like you think of the application stack at a company, like Wix. You have 1,000 applications. So here we go. 300 services running on approximately 20,000 Kubernetes pods, generating so application logs, all of which are aggregated into a central log database that adds up to an average storage of 35 terabytes a day.
That's a shit ton of logs.
And they architected a solution to implement the strategy that I described before that works backwards from errors in logs to find vulnerabilities. Now, their accuracy was not great, but 26% of the alerts resulted in a real vulnerability, but the other 74% were due to edge cases. But still, they got that 26%.
But the real question is, are any real vulnerabilities not being detected by this method?
No, it's a valid point. It's a valid point, Jeff.
No, I like the idea. I applaud it truly. But conceptually, it's not a new idea.
The other one that didn't break out.
No, I agree.
The other one they didn't break out is which ones were actual vulnerabilities caused by lack of education or edge cases. So, like the intersection of the two.
They kind of made it feel like to me that the edge cases were. So they put in quotes, either typos or plain bugs, such as an empty in clause, in parentheses clause. So coding errors that maybe aren't an actual vulnerability, but indicative of some type of bug, which is also valid to discover in their process. So I thought it was a great article, a really neat approach. And in the end, they say they're going to release. It is an open source cloud native tool that will help organizations monitor their application stack for vulnerabilities. This is something that if you listen to when we were in the off week with Gary McGraw, that I asked Gary about, like, how do we get good telemetry from our applications to do some kind of analysis, which ironically Gary was like, Log4j is a great framework for doing that. And at that time, certainly he was not wrong.
No.
And
he's still not wrong.
He's still not wrong because many teams adopted Log4j. It just happened to have a vulnerability. And that's not, I'm not in the blame and shame kind of game. But just kind of an interesting, aspect.
But the idea of you don't have to run out and just buy yet another tool, yet another solution.
Scan this, scan that, right?
Other ways.
Yep.
This is critical thinking. This is the kind of stuff that they tried to encourage back where I used to work at that certain place.
Mm-hmm.
Just how do you? One of the tests that I took to qualify to work at that hallowed hall was looking at a two-dimensional depiction of a three-dimensional object and simply asking, what does this look like from behind? What does it look like from the side? Just encouraging people to approach the problem from a different perspective. Mm-hmm. We don't do enough of that.
Approaching the problem from a different perspective, given the data set that you have.
Yep.
Okay.
Sometimes it's pretty obvious. My story number 7. Bypassing a Cloudflare WAF using cross-site scripting via SQL injection. This, if you read through this and you've done or familiarized yourself with web app security and pen testing, you're like, wow, this is like, I don't often run across a blatant SQL injection that when you put the double quote character inside of a parameter generates a SQL injection error. That SQL injection error also is redisplaying back data that leads to the cross-site scripting vulnerability. That's a really blatantly obvious set of vulnerabilities in the web app. It's not too much of a jump to go, how do I use that somewhat kind of green field, right, Larry? There's a lot of possibility there to construct a bypass for a WAF. So that was kind of amazed that stuff still exists out there.
Tyler, we've never worked with a company that still has that stuff out there that exists.
All right, so maybe I'm wrong. Stuff people still make these mistakes.
Not one.
Yeah.
Maybe multiple times that they've patched and reintroduced, and none.
Yeah.
Every time you think it's gone, there's just something stupid that's always there. This is where pen testers really hate this stuff. Good offensive security people don't want to find the same stuff. We want to find novel stuff. We want to have to dig. We want to challenge. Let's not make these same mistakes. Let's fix this because this kind of tests and this kind of stuff that you find just sucks. It's stupid. I'm gonna make it hurt harder because it's so stupid.
Yeah, they did eventually fix this vulnerability, but not in a great way. They kind of pushed off the disclosure process and then revamped their entire site, and then magically the vulnerability disappeared. So yeah, there's that.
It's funny how often that happens.
And Tyler, you're gonna think this is funny. I mentioned that about the company that has seen this thing and we do these things, and I literally just got a Signal message from them and said, are you talking about Nope. Yep. And now he's gonna send me a Signal message. He's like, damn it, I can't believe you even mentioned that. I just texted you about the fact that I caught on what you were talking about.
Well, it was my story number 7. If you want to send me that, you can. My story number 16 though is Shimmer. Instead of an I, it's a 1, and this is a Chromebook jailbreak is kind of how it's being pitched. It's kind of interesting. So this particular tool works. So I'll read you the quote.
I mean, this is great for you're the Linux on the desktop, because if you take Chrome OS.
Chrome OS is already Linux on the desktop, but this is jailbreaking Google's version of Linux on the desktop.
Chrome OS on the desktop. I rest my case.
Yeah, so Chrome OS is Linux. However, Google has done a really good job of locking down that platform, and that's OEM dependent, right? So it depends on who makes your Chromebook.
Yep.
They make the decision as to how much of those protections they're going to build in. And so this tool works, and I quote, as one of the hackers involved explains, only kernel partitions are checked for signatures by Chrome OS firmware. Other partitions can be edited after the forced read-only bit is removed. And they talk about shim, which I think in this case is an overloaded term, and they get an RMA shim. So someone leaked an RMA shim. And so I'm kind of reading between the lines, trying to like figure out exactly what they're talking about. And so what I think is you can get a bootloader and a kernel that allows you to boot your Chromebook into like this maintenance mode to access things and do diagnostics. Someone leaked that and realized that the secure boot process on your Chromebook is only validating the shim or the bootloader and the kernel. And once you've done that, you've passed all secure boot states at that point, and then you can use that capability in the RMA shim and bootloader to then modify other partitions and install whatever operating system that you want. And my guess is in the non-RMA shim, secure boot kind of permeates deeper into the system so that you can't modify these things, and this is what allows you to basically install your own operating system. Again, I'm taking a lot of liberties there because I don't necessarily fully understand like how this stuff works on Chromebooks and Chrome OS, because it is different. Also, I know in Chromebooks there's like a screw you have to undo.
Isn't that the forced read-only bit?
Yes, the forced read-only bit
is an actual physical screw.
Yes, in some Chromebooks it is a physical screw that you have to remove. But I think that's just if you want to swap out your firmware, or I'm not exactly sure how it works. But again, I was reading up on some of the articles around this and reading up on this is the GitHub link that I put in there. Like knowing what I know about how UEFI firmware works and preserve secure boot, extrapolating that into Chrome OS. That's my guess. If someone wants to weigh in, like if you've done this or are involved in this project and you want to like write to us and tell us like exactly what's going on, I'd love that, because they're kind of my other observation is they're kind of cagey about this because Google's probably really pissed off that this happened and they don't want to give like the full details as exactly how all this stuff is happening.
Yeah, isn't this the memory specific address and byte order during your boot process, the call that you can make to get it, kind of like the Intel ME management bits, where you can send those? That shim is just a memory location that has a specific register, right, or sequence of bits that then changes how the bootloader actually functions, right? Isn't that what they're talking about with the shim?
It could, and again, like shim is like an overloaded term. There are...
Yeah, I was going to say there's memory shims. I know what those are. And
there's shim, like the bootloader for Linux that helps implement secure boot. But you're right, Tyler, there's also like one of the functions, so I can talk about what I know about with UEFI. One of the jobs of UEFI is to establish regions in memory and protect those regions of memory and set that stuff up for further stages of the boot that shouldn't be able to access those regions of memory. I think Jesse touched on that when he was talking about SMM. We started to get into how SMRAM is created and how it's protected regions of memory and stuff like that. Yeah,
that's what I was thinking of. That's the only way I could see this affecting what they're talking about and the ability for them to change that root file system verification. It would have to be that early in the process, and I think that's exactly.
But also, like, I think this stuff should be open. I think it's back to our previous conversation where if you acquire hardware and either Google or whatever OEM is producing your Chromebook has stopped support for that, you should have to me, this falls under right to repair. You should have the freedom to then install customized firmware and software on that device to further your usage of it. You shouldn't have to throw it away and go buy a new one, which is what the OEMs and manufacturers want you to do. They want you to go, oh, you used that for 2 years. Time to throw it out and give more money to Google or Acer or whoever, Samsung, to buy your new Chromebook, right? Which in that model, because there's a lot of those are really lower cost devices.
The profit margin isn't high, so by getting you to buy,
they want you to buy a new one,
to making it disposable to get you to buy a new one every 2 to 3 years.
And so they hate this. They hate stuff like this because it enables people to use their Chromebooks for even longer.
Yep, my Chromebook with Linux is running like a champ. The Chromebook with Chrome OS is like you've been end of life. You can't get any more updates.
Oh, so annoying. So annoying.
Yep. See, and then they're identical models.
Now it's a lot higher cost, but that's why I like the framework because it's so modular. They've done a great job, not just with the platform, but like when it comes time to upgrade. I can take it apart and I can swap in a new motherboard, right? Like that's to me that's smart. To me that's supporting the needs and requirements of the user. That's like, I want to keep my device for as long as possible. Like if I buy a new one, is my screen going to be that much better? Is the keyboard going to be that much better? Like, no, like if I can swap out the main board, why wouldn't I just do that?
Yep.
That's why I like the framework model.
And arguably there's something to be said for, and Paul, I know you've experienced this in the past too, about some of the older Mac, and even the current,
Apple really pisses me off
the Intel Mac stuff. No, on the contrary. For so many years, Josh Wright made fun of me because I had a MacBook Pro that was 7 years old, and it was my daily driver, and I taught from it, and I did course development on it, and it worked perfectly fine with all of the modern versions of Word, PowerPoint, anything that I needed to do, and it worked no issue. It was not like I wasn't going to turn it on and I was going to have it boot and it was going to be there in 3 seconds. You know, it was going to turn it on, it's going to boot, and it's going to take 30 seconds to boot. But you know what? How often did I do that? Like, I still have some of those systems at home that are running, that are Macs that are 7 to almost 10 years old. It worked just fine.
But Apple wants you to buy the new M1, M2.
They do want me to, but they still work just fine. So, no Linux needed. I have a different experience. That's all.
Yeah. Well, I think there's something to be said for, because again, I think one of the underlying themes in this episode is the requirements don't necessarily drive new hardware, but the manufacturers are forcing us to get new hardware.
Yep.
Now, I like getting new hardware. I like acquiring new hardware, certainly, but I want the decision to be mine. Like, I want the freedom. I want to be like, oh, I want to upgrade, not that I'm forced to upgrade. And I think that's your point. You want to be like, I'm still using this Mac. It's totally fine for me. It's working. It's meeting all my requirements. Like, don't force me to upgrade. Like, don't stop sending me updates. I might need like modern upgrades to applications, but I can't get those because I'm on an older. That's one of the reasons why I left the Apple ecosystem. It was like, well, if you want the new app, you're going to upgrade your hardware. I'm like, well, I don't need to upgrade my hardware. Like, I bought like the trash can Mac, dude. That thing still flies. That thing is still, oh my God, we have one here in the studio. It's still amazing. It's an amazing piece of hardware still. Like, it really, like, why are you going to force me to upgrade that?
But now, arguably, some of the new features with some of the latest Mac OS are not supported.
Correct.
Because of hardware limitations and cameras and TPMs and all that type of stuff. So you can't upgrade, but they're still providing security updates for those operating systems, at least for now.
Do you guys, I know we're running long on time.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about the no-fly list that leaked?
Yes.
My whole thing on this is like innocent until proven guilty, which is my kind of bone to pick with the no-fly list. And I know you're not being convicted of a crime. However, you are being deprived of a liberty.
Discriminated?
Yeah, deprived of a liberty without due process. Here I am sounding like an attorney. I am totally not an attorney.
Where is Carlos Perez when you need him?
Right.
Because
the name collision.
Carlos, I mean, I haven't talked to Carlos admittedly in a long time, and I feel bad about it. But
yeah, I wonder how he's doing.
For the longest time, Carlos had so much issue flying because
there was another Carlos Perez.
There was another Carlos Perez on the no-fly list with the same birthday.
Yeah.
Who was like a convicted drug dealer.
What are the chances? But like, you go to the pharmacy and then what's the first thing they ask you? Like, name, date of birth.
Yep. But still, the fact that it wasn't him and that it was so difficult for him to travel for so long, certainly after 9/11 when the no-fly list was really, really well documented. That
I love that it was just a commercial airline and they just found it through poking at Shodan. Like, this is how a lot of stuff just happens.
Yep.
Yeah, it
literally falls out of the sky.
It really wasn't a hack. It was like I don't know. You could almost call it stunt hacking to find this, right? But also, we're all not clamoring over like, oh, am I on the no-fly list? Because if we flew recently, we know we're not on the no-fly list, so it's like not a big deal.
Yep.
Right?
I mean, how many times in our industry have we made the joke, oh, you're on another list?
Yeah.
I mean, I wish I knew how many lists I was actually on, which is probably would be rather disappointing. Wait,
There's a few, but there's not
there's a few lists, or
as people make them.
There's a few lists, or there's a few lists that I'm on, Tyler.
Both.
Probably both.
Because I was going to say, if you have any inside knowledge, please share offline. I'd love to.
It took me 10 years to get off of one of those. So yeah, there are lists. There just depends on what you're trying to do and where you're trying to go.
Yeah, I mean, I have not done the FOIA request on myself yet.
One last story.
Pass the ice before you do that.
Serious security Samba login bug caused by outdated crypto.
Yes.
This was a great article. I know we don't have a lot of time to dig into all the details. My story number 6. Make sure you go read it. It's awesome. So
let's dig into it a little bit.
I was digging into it.
Pass the ice before you do that.
Don't use bad crypto.
Well, yeah. Don't use bad crypto.
Like a more practical thing I pulled from this article was I looked at that, like 4.17 was the version of Samba that enforced the disabling of the MD5 crypto that was suspect for this. And then I looked at some of my systems that were running Samba. I'm like, wait a minute. I administer systems that have Samba. I'm like, crap, they're Debian. And then I started looking in Debian, and I'm like, so just kind of like public service announcement. If you're Debian Buster, which is version 10, you are not even close to the version that fixes this issue. And Debian actually just listed as vulnerable. Again, this is the theme of this episode. Now I'm forced to do an upgrade. So I'm like, what? Now I got to rebuild like the backup file share here in the studio, right? I mean, not to give like too much OPSEC away, but like, I'm administering the system.
But it's Debian.
It happened to be Debian. I did my due diligence. I updated all the Debian. I followed all the guides. Like I configured the file sharing. It's up. It's running. It's great. I keep it updated.
And it's Debian.
And it's Debian. And it's stable. Like also, one of the reasons why I was like, well, it's Debian. You know what? I'll keep it Debian because it's a file server. It doesn't need to do anything but file serving. So like, I don't need like modern kernels and updated like I can literally pull the Samba code that's in the Debian repo for Buster 10 and it works and it's fine and it serves its purpose.
And arguably it's not OpenBSD, but they've done a much better job about some of the other distros about doing some of their due diligence on the security.
It's Debian, and now I'm looking at this advisory and I'm going, well shit, now I'm vulnerable. Like crap.
But the real, I mean, so having read through this and knowing quite a bit about Kerberos and Kerberos protocol in Microsoft.
Yeah, so hold on, Tyler. I just for our audience, this vulnerability affects Windows SMB in addition to the Samba implementation of it. It's the same CVE number is what I learned from reading this article.
But this is only the checksum of the integrity header for Kerberos SMB protocol initiation.
It's the HMAC. It's the HMAC MD5, correct?
Yes, HMAC MD5. So in order to weaponize this, like A, you've got to get a collision. B, by getting a collision, you're really only able to spoof the integrity header of the checksum for the HMAC MD5.
Yep.
Which doesn't like bypass authentication, doesn't initiate a stream, doesn't do. There's a lot of other pieces to this. So while you should not use MD5 and collisions are possible, the weaponization and exploitation of this becomes a lot less like super feasible from a easy proof of concept to kind of visualize. This isn't something you're just going to go out and, get on a Samba server because there's this CVE for it.
Thank you. You've helped prioritize my remediation efforts and all of our listeners as well, Tyler, right? Like this is on my list, but now it's just kind of fallen a little bit down on my list. Like it's not a drop everything and rebuild my entire server architecture.
This particular article, Paul, why I'm glad we dove into it a little bit more. It brought a couple of little light bulb moments. A number of years ago, Tyler, I think you participated too at ListenCon.
Yes.
Tom ListenCon. Tom Liston created a PDF for us to follow along in like a multi-user dungeon and answer questions in this PDF and change the actual content of the PDF. And despite changing it, there was, I'm assuming, JavaScript code within the PDF to generate MD5 collisions automatically. So that no matter how many times you answered questions and changed the PDF,
But he had a whole storyline. Like, let's be clear, this is the only time in my life I've questioned time travel and if it was really actually possible. He works for a very secretive place.
Yep.
Does interesting work with
used to work for a secretive place.
Used to work with very complex things that if someone came up with time travel, it would be them. And he's like, all right, we're doing an experiment. And like, MD5 collision hashes at the time should not have been feasibly possible the way he was doing them, with the whole like, all right, we're going to go in the future, we're going to change this. You wouldn't know what we changed this to, but you're going to write a message back to yourself, and the MD5 is going to be right, and you're going to know you were from the future. Like the whole thing, like,
yep.
It really made you question your sanity.
And it was in near real time.
It was real time.
It was real,
and he had you check them yourself.
Yep.
So like, hats off to Tom Liston for probably the only time in my life I've questioned my existence and timelines.
So one, how actually easy it is to do MD5 collisions nowadays.
Yep.
Very.
The second one was, what was the fix for this?
For
this particular for this vulnerability, what was the fix that was implemented? Like, what was the configuration change that needed to be made?
There was two.
Reject MD5.
Yes, two.
Specifically, what was the?
Hold on, I can tell you. I can answer Larry's question. It's in the article. They tell you that by default there were two configuration options.
So reject MD5 client equals yes.
Yes, correct. And there was another one
and
too.
Reject MD5 server equals yes. It's very similar.
The biggest one that I took away from this was reject MD5 client.
Mm-hmm.
That means the only reason, arguably, that this MD5 code remains within Samba and Windows SMB is to support legacy clients.
Correct.
Of such an age that MD5 is the only thing they can do.
So I'm wondering my next step, I'm glad you brought that up, Larry, was to look at the version of Samba that I have, see if it actually supports those configuration options, put those configuration options in the latest version of Samba on Debian 10, and see if it will invalidate those MD5 clients, because I don't have that legacy issue, right?
Right.
All the clients accessing are Windows 10 or above, and modern versions
should not start at
Mac
MD5.
OS, or right?
Yes,
they
should not start that quote negotiation at MD5. Like, the only reason it is here is because people still have stuff out there that can only do MD5 for this.
And what are we talking about? Are we talking about like old version of Windows, Mac OS, Linux, probably
old versions of Samba?
It's going to be like an appliance, like a NAS or an application server. Often uses older versions of Kerberos or Samba or SMBv1. We see that quite a bit in Active Directory, where you're going to have MD5 in the HMAC. So
and there are still.
I definitely don't have anything that old in this environment.
And there, in your environment, and there are still
other environments. There are
still
sure.
companies that still have. I was talking with someone not all that long ago, while I was still at Indie Guardians, that said that, we just had this huge, massive project organization-wide to turn off SMBv1. Less than 6 months ago.
It's all over the place.
And they thought they had it all, and they broke a bunch of critical stuff that could only speak SMBv1.
I empathize with that. I mean, I maintain the small environment here at the studio from a Linux perspective, right? And I'm fortunate that I don't have a lot of that legacy stuff. Right. But you start extrapolating that out to businesses that have been in business for 20 years and have acquired massive amounts of technology. They have some of these problems with legacy at scale, and that's hard. I mean, look at my firewall at home, it's my home firewall, and I'm like, I gotta update it.
But arguably it's more than your home firewall, because you work from home. It's your work firewall, if you think about it that way. That's some of the things I dread. I know my firewall needs upgrades, but in order for me to do that, I've got to do it on a weekend, because my traffic to do for work's got to pass through that firewall.
But also, there's no pressing issue, because I guarantee you probably have gigabit, right?
No.
Or something pretty close.
No.
I have gig at home, and from Verizon, and my firewall doesn't break a sweat.
Yeah, let's put it this way.
It's totally fine the way it is, but like I have to update it because I've got all these like heinous vulnerabilities.
My firewall also doesn't break a sweat, and I've only got 75 up, 75 down, but it's Verizon Business Class, and it does
so it's a true right.
And I don't need gigabit because you know what? You know where the block on everything else that I do is Wi-Fi, and like streaming one. We're streaming one stream or maybe two streams of low quality YouTube at a time.
I had 150 up and down for the longest time, and the only reason I went to gig is actually really funny. Is that my son was doing yard work and cut the fiber optic line, and I feel bad because I got really mad at him for doing that. But then after I did some investigation, I apologized. I'm like, dude, that wasn't your fault. I'm like, I just looked at how deep that cable was buried, and it was not to spec. Like any one of us could have accidentally cut that cable. Like, dude, totally not your fault. Like, it is the fault of the installer for not burying that cable deeper and it not being in conduit. And so when I got it repaired, I was like, well, I'm like down now. I'm like on the phone with support and stuff. I'm like, just redo it as gig. Like, what's the price difference? It wasn't like exorbitant. So I'm like,
no,
if you're gonna come out, run a new cable, like redo the whole thing, recheck everything. I'm like, just do it as gig. Like, I got Cat 6 running to it, for my Ethernet ham. I'm like, just redo it as gig.
But
just for that. I'm like, my firewall's gig. I'm like, whatever. And I'm monitoring. I'm like, it's just
mine doesn't break a sweat at 75 up, 75 down.
Yeah, no, dude. No, most devices wouldn't.
Yep.
Like most devices that are unsupported today wouldn't break a sweat. It's
like we'll go through Apple TV. We'll throw something on and 4K and start streaming that, and it's
totally fine.
It's fine. Like, it doesn't even touch the 75. And the only
reason you have to update is because you've got heinous vulnerabilities laying around in firmware, software, and whatever.
And that's the hardware wise, but I don't need to upgrade my speed because I don't need it anymore.
No.
And I get so much benefit. Static IP.
Yes.
I can run what the hell I want.
No,
I've got Ethernet handoff.
I do dynamic DNS now.
I've got Ethernet handoff. I have 5 IPs. And if I upgrade, it's expensive.
Oh, business class is expensive, yes. We do that here in studio. Yes, it's expensive.
Oh, yeah. No, And of course, the business class DVRs are more expensive.
Right.
The same thing. And the crazy part is that we moved into our house almost 10 years ago. Same DVRs that we had the day we moved in, and they're 10 years old and they still work and they're still relatively speedy.
Wow. Yep. The underlying theme of legacy that we had in this episode was pretty epic. So thanks everyone for listening and watching this edition of Paul Security Weekly. Larry, take us out.
Over and legacy.